Thanks everyone for joining. And if you're watching afterwards, thanks so much. This is a workshop that's in a series of workshops we do monthly that growthmatch.com presents. And this particular workshop, I'm super excited about. It's very timely for a number of reasons. So Mike Simmons is an all-around badass when it comes to sales and revenue and working with tech companies and startups, so larger tech companies and startups alike. And one of the reasons I think this topic is relevant right now is because it's getting harder for startups and tech companies to fundraise, and revenue is always important, but it's becoming even more important now. And so this is super timely, not only for us, but a lot of the other founders that I know. So Mike, thank you so much for joining, and let's jump right into it.
Awesome. And thanks for having me. We're going to use the whiteboard as we go through and just build together over the course of the conversation. If you would like a slide that shows any of these models, just send me a direct message within the Growth Match platform, and I'll make sure that you get a copy of it. I've got produced slides that go through each of these pieces, but what I've found is more effective when we're talking about it is actually building in flight, building while we start putting things together. So I am Mike Simmons. I am the founder of Catalyst Sale, and I have been fortunate enough to kind of find my calling in sales. And so the thing that I like most about sales, or most about what I get to do when it comes to selling, it's helping the non-traditional salesperson get really good at sales, because there's a lot of crap out there about what you should do or shouldn't do. And ultimately, I think as founders, as people who are building businesses, we understand the importance of solving important problems in the marketplace. And that's all sales is. It's about problem solving. It's literally connecting the dots between a problem that is known or unknown and a solution that is known or unknown. And it becomes more complex when the problem is unknown and the solution is unknown, because it adds a couple of layers. It becomes a bit simpler if the problem is known on the customer side and the solution is known on the customer side. But we'll get into revenue engine. So what is a revenue engine? What is a revenue engine? And there's a couple of different ways to look at this. One way to look at it is think about the engine that you have on a vehicle. That vehicle could be a bike, or could be your car. But there are some of us who have bikes that have turned into motorcycles. Those have high performance engines built on them. When we first learned to ride a bike, we might have had, if you've got kids now, they have these things called balance bikes, which they didn't exist back when I was a kid, but those things have two wheels on them, a set of handlebars, and you kind of scoot yourself around. Well, then you graduate to something that might have gears associated with it. We add individual components to it. That helps specialize the bike. It create opportunities for us to increase momentum, get better power to the wheels from something like our legs. And then we move to a point where we start to add in some mechanical things like additional gears, or we might move ahead and start adding an actual engine. So let's look at the revenue engine in the same model. The revenue engine in some organizations that have been around for a while, it's going to have multiple parts. In organizations like yours, it may only have a couple of parts. And the key thing is making sure that we apply the right parts in the right context at the right time to have the impact that we're looking for. So what is a revenue engine? It's the thing that you have created to drive revenue inside your organization, And we'll just start with a dollar sign. So I've got a dollar sign here. When we're building toward revenue, there are a couple of paths. When we first start, there may only be one path. The one path is direct outreach from the founder to people in their friends and family. network, to people that they've worked with before. Why? Because it's a bit easier for us to engage with those folks. It feels comfortable. The challenge with that being your path is sometimes they are not your ideal customer. Sometimes they can't pay you for the work. And I think even worse, sometimes they'll pay you for the work, but they're doing it because they like you, not because they buy into the thing that you're building. So we've got one path to revenue when we start. When we start to create some complexity here, we can add additional pieces, maybe partnerships as an example. So partnerships, maybe some marketing, one-to-many marketing. We can come up with different ways, different things that can start to contribute to the point where we get to our opportunity to generate revenue. And then when we move beyond this, we start looking at ways that we can either ways that we can grow the revenue. So how do we create an opportunity for growth? And this from just a basic perspective, what we're talking about is demand, acquisition, retention, and expansion. We're looking at this and we're saying, look, we've got three key components to the engine. One is the demand side. The other is the acquisition side, acquisition component. And then on this side, it's do we have a recurring revenue business? If so, then retention is really important to us. A really good path to retention is expanding. With the exception of one instance in my career, I've never seen an organization where we were expanding the relationship with the company and then they decided not to move forward. And it was a senior leadership change inside a large software company. And that blew up the situation. But for the most part, if we're focused on expanding, we're going to create better opportunities for us to retain those organizations that we acquired. And through this data, we'll determine where do we identify best areas for demand so that we start to optimize the engine. This is the type of information that we're going to cover as we go through. I'm going to pause and just ask if there are any questions. You know, we've got a small group of people. The more interactive this is, the better. The questions will help me get a sense for, am I communicating effectively? Am I moving a little bit too fast? What do I need to slow down on? So any questions or comments so far?
No questions. No questions. This looks a lot to me like an acquisition funnel, like the growth funnel, sometimes like the R funnel as I've heard it. So this is definitely tracking with me.
Awesome. Yep. Very good. Yeah. And that's what it is. Look, we start there. If we look at this part of on this side, go further out to the left on this diagram, you start to say, okay, well, there's so many different areas where we can put time, energy, and resource. From a problem solving and a design perspective, if this is the key problem that we're solving for, work backwards and solve for the first step here. And then for the next step here, don't try to solve for it all the way out here and hope. And that's me as a sales guy, not a marketing guy. Sales guy, direct interactions with customers, speaking to the people who can actually buy your product, the people who are interested in investing in the resources and who have the problem that you solve for. Because when you actually talk to those people, what you can learn really quickly is what's important to them. We've got to be careful about validating what we think is important to them, because a lot of times we can organize our questions to get that validation. What we want to do is really dig in deeper, do some root cause analysis. And the first place that I want to go, or the next place I want to go relative to this, and this is kind of what the model of the engine would look like. Now we start to say, okay, what are the components of the engine? How do we structure things properly so that we can optimize? And for me, it starts with customer. So the first place that we'll start is with the customer. Now, the most common challenge that businesses run into is, at least that I've seen, is they focus more on the business. They focus more on our processes. They focus more on what we do. They focus more on how we execute. That's okay, But at a business level, you're not the one buying from your customer. I've never come across a rep who's made their number, or an organization who's been able to sustain itself by buying from itself. Now, where that starts to shift a little bit is if you're managed service inside an individual organization, inside a large company where you're delivering a service inside the company, and then ultimately your customers are internal customers inside the organization. But at the stage that we're talking, this isn't common. So we're talking about how do we, one, understand our customer, understand our business, and then the last piece that we'll get into before we wrap up is our approach. How do we approach things as individuals in the way that we engage with people? So if we understand what the mechanics look like of the engine, and we understand the components that are important, we can start to figure out, where does the fuel come from to drive the business, and how do we maintain it from an individual perspective? I'll pause one more moment before we start getting deep into customer. Any questions or comments here?
Love starting with customer.
Good. Awesome. So let's do it. And again, if you want slides that show some of these components, just let me know via direct message. Happy to do that. Thought we would build in flight as we go along. You can start seeing these pieces come together. Okay, so one of the most common mistakes we make is as it relates to our customer. So many of us have played board games growing up. We might still play board games with our kids, or we still play board games with our partners. Many of us are familiar with board games. I'm going to use board games to describe each of these specific areas. And if there are questions around board games, or you haven't had experience with a board game, raise your hand and let me know. But when I think about the customer starts here at this point, at point A. They want, actually, we want them to get up here to Z. Give me just, we would like to see them go from point A to Z. Z in this case is they're at the top of the mountain, top of the rooftops. They're shouting out to everybody saying, this is the most amazing solution that I've ever come across relative to this specific problem. You have to work with this organization. We want these customers to become advocates of ours. Now, they may or may not want to be advocates of ours, but we'd like to see them get there toward the end. So at some point along the journey, there's things that happen. Like, let's say right here, it's implementation success in a SaaS-based product. We're delivering some technology inside the organization. It's actually solving for the problem that we said it was going to solve for. It's increased efficiency. It's reduced costs inside their organizations to optimize for things that are happening. This is where this is solution. So we've solved. Well, as we work ourselves back, there's a lot of things that need to happen before we get to that solve piece. And this is that customer decision-making process. They navigate from a situation where they have a problem to they solve for the problem to they shout from the rooftops. They may or may not know what that problem is. They may or may not be aware of it. There's this transition that happens where a problem goes from unknown to known. That usually happens in some kind of experience. So I'm riding on my longboard. I've got a dry land longboard that I can cruise around the street on. I'm riding on my longboard. I fall off of the longboard and I snap my ankle. Not that I want to put that out in the universe, but let's say that happens. I now have an experience that created a problem. My problem now has become known. It's clear. And my solution might be a set of crutches or, there's going to be a bunch of things that happen in between then. But there's an experience that happens where unknown problems become known. in sales, this one-to-one conversation, this usually happens in the context of the questions we ask, not the things we share. Many of us will put billboards up and run in and want to go right into a meeting and say, well, let me tell you how I can solve all your problems, without actually testing to see if the problem exists, or asking questions to reveal whether or not that problem is something that they're even thinking about inside their organization. So we go from unknown to known problem, ideally through the questions or experience that gets created. Then the customer starts to ask some of their own questions. They might go and search on Google. They might go into a Slack instance. They might go into to a user group that they've got inside LinkedIn, but they'll start to ask some questions. Then they'll start to envision, wow, I could see this solution actually helping me solve the problem. Then they'll want to go through some kind of testing process to determine, will this actually solve my problem? And there might be a lot of steps in between here. We're kind of moving through some things really quick, but what they're doing is they're going through their decision-making process, their specific set of experiences, to move from unknown problem to known problem to, let's say they engage with a business here, to now known solution, to testing that solution, to then going through and purchasing. The challenge that we have as revenue leaders inside organizations, business leaders inside our organization, people who want to help others solve the problem, is going through and understanding, what does this journey look like for our specific customers? And that's going to vary depending on the product and service that you deliver into the marketplace. It's going to vary depending on the customer on their side. It's going to vary depending on the number of people that need to get engaged on the customer side. This journey is not a straight line. There are going to be, and we've all seen these diagrams, but there are going to be situations where the customer is going to have to meander back and forth. They're going to work their way through. Now, on a positive note, as they meander through this, they're always picking up new experiences. So I think of this as linear. It's not a straight line. I still think of it as linear because the experiences are always being picked up and we're picking up new pieces all the way through. This to me is like playing the board game, the game of life. And what you can do is you can take a board game like the game of life, and you can start to map out your customer journey and start to figure out, where do they go? What's the experience that they go through when the problem goes from unknown, out of sight, out of mind, not worrying about it, to known? Does that experience happen when they engage with someone? Does it happen when they see something? Does it happen when they experience something? Does it happen someplace else? And then how did they go through and start looking for information, looking for solutions? Where can we, and we'll move next into business, where can we find individual points in this journey where we can help accelerate some of their experience, reduce friction, and help them move through? So from a customer perspective, we're focused on customer journey. What are they going through? What's their specific experience? And if we model and we build out our processes, design our processes around this, think about playing the game of golf. We begin with the end in mind. We work our way backward. We identify where we're going to be on a tee box, and we start taking specific shots all the way through here to get to our hole. We design backward and execute forward. And we validate that in the conversations that we have with customers. I'm going to go ahead and pause here just for a moment to see if there's any questions or comments.
I have a question. First of all, I love this. I think I'm curious, how do you map this? You know, do you create like a spreadsheet that's like instant, not unknown, and then these steps, and then you start taking notes about what you hypothesize the situation? I think I'm curious how you actually map this.
Yeah. So the way that I go through, the process that I go through, and the process I'll go through when I work with organizations is this. There's first, and from a marketing perspective, people will talk about it relative to understanding buyer personas. From a sales revenue perspective, I will identify this as ideal customer profile. From a organization, a business perspective, if I'm selling B2B, If I'm selling B2C, it will be from the individual person who is buying it. In B2B, we need to understand it both at the organization level and the individual level. We need to understand both of those. So things that we'll first understand is like, who are they? What do they care about? What do they care about? Why do they care about those things? How are they solving those things today? What are the short-term, medium-term, and long-term things that they need to go through? This will look like a model that you'll see me share in a number of areas called that I focus around problem solving or account planning, which is a hexagon. What problem? Who cares about it? Who has it? Who's impacted by it? Why do they care about it? How are they solving today? How might they solve in the future working with us? When do they need to solve by? What are the timelines? Another tip, we as solution providers, we do not create urgency. We don't. We reveal urgency. There's one person in my house that can create urgency. She's 30 feet that way, I think, or 20 feet, depending on what she's doing. But there, as a sales professional, as a solution provider, you're not going to create urgency. You can reveal it, though, in the questions that you ask. So this is account planning. You're modeling it relative to understanding ideal customer. Once we understand that and we know who our targets are, then we can start to move into, okay, given that we understand the problems that they have, the way that they're solving, how we solve differently, then we could start asking some questions around, hey, when you found us, what were you doing? How did you find us? Oh, I found you on LinkedIn. I've been reading your content. I've been watching your videos. I've been doing whatever. Okay, that becomes a data point. When you can talk to your existing customers, presuming that you have customers, and ask them, what did they go through? What did the process look like from their side? Not our side. What did the process look like from their side? What steps? Think about this in the same way that you would think about, and I'm a cook, I'm not a baker. Big difference, right? Bakers have to measure. They have to, things have to happen in a specific order. They have to happen in a specific manner. A cook, I like throwing a little bit of salt in there, a little bit of pepper, maybe some garlic, some olive oil, and we'll work to taste. Are we dealing with inside our operating environment? Are we dealing with cooks or bakers? Do they go through a specific process that they can define and document, or do they just kind of come together through it? Shelby, to get back to your specific questions, how do I do it? I try to make sure that there's as few steps as possible between where we want to go and where we are. And so simple as possible, complex as necessary. Gather notes, start to identify patterns, and then start to map it up. As much as I'm a spreadsheet guy, I don't think you can do this in a spreadsheet. And the reason I don't think you can do it in a spreadsheet is because unless you get a lot of data, it's going to be hard to analyze it. Like if I've got 100 rows of data across a couple of different industries, I can use pivot tables to start to organize some things. If I'm working with 3 or 4 customers, it's literally customer interviews and just saying, okay, so when this first happened, when you really felt like, oh, I've got to fix this, what was the thing that happened just before that? Okay, and then when you took your next step, what was the thing that you did just then? And then maybe ask kind of a Columbo question. Well, who did you have to get involved? Did you have to go? Where'd you go? Who did you need to get other people involved in your conversation? And then I lay it out on a whiteboard or a piece of paper. And I just want it to look like the same kind of journey that I would go through if I was getting ready to hike a mountain, if I was getting ready to drive a car from Phoenix to Austin, if I was getting ready to get on book flights to get from one place to another. I mean, there's going to be a couple of different jumping off points, but I use the visualization of seeing things move along so that I understand next logical steps from the customer perspective and understand each of the pieces where they potentially ran into some conflict. Is that helpful at all?
Yeah, that's super helpful. So ideal outcome here, having done some interviews with customers, et cetera, is literally a map where it's
Literally
like
a map.
customer started here, maybe some descriptive text and stuff and notes, but it's literally like at point A to B to C to ultimately solving the problem.
That's exactly right. And as few steps as possible, so simple as possible, as complex as necessary. Don't get into analysis paralysis, especially early stage. Like the early stage view is, hey, I want to get this thing as perfect as possible, and we're going to design for all these. You are not going to be able to guess this properly. You have to get out there and start taking action. You have to start getting out there and start getting information, getting feedback in there, because what will end up happening at some point in time is you will find a place where along this journey, there are blockers that get in the way. There are obstacles that the customer has a hard time navigating. And this starts to get, is a good transition into the business discussion. That's where we, as people who are working with customers, can create power-ups to help them accelerate or overcome those challenges. Think about playing Mario Kart, or if you're my age, it would have been Hot Wheels, and you'd have a track, and on that track you might have a battery operated set of rollers that would power up or move the car faster so that it could make it through the loop. So where can we deliberately place our power up experiences to help the customer make the transition that they need to do, either by reducing friction or accelerating growth? So this is literally a map, and as few steps as possible, because if you start to overcomplicate it, what you're going to do is you're going to find out that there's going to be a lot of confusion, and it's going to be really hard to assess your data. Now, as far as tracking the information, absolutely track it inside a spreadsheet or track it inside a CRM, because once you've got the data available, you can start to look at the data in a way that's meaningful and say, are we getting stuck in a certain place? Because Shelby, your perception of where you're getting stuck is going to be a little bit different than Zach's perception of where we're getting stuck is going to be a little bit different than my perception. And the data, if we've got those points built in there, will help us help reveal that for us.
Awesome. Now you answered what was going to be my next question, and an obvious leader to where I think you were going anyway, which is like, once we have the map, what do we do with it, right? And I'm sure you have more to say on that, but I love the idea of finding these moments where there's a blocker or an obstacle or something, and trying to create a way to remove that friction or help the customer move through the obstacle.
Right. Yeah. It's just, and we're going to get into sales process now type stuff. So understanding it from the business perspective. So we talked about the customer. So customer journey, we go from, I have no idea I have a problem, to now I have a problem, I want to fix it. I navigate a couple of different steps to go through the process. I get things implemented inside the organization. I actually am successful. So now I'm smiling, to now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to shout it from the rooftops. Here are all the exciting things that we're doing inside the organization. So we go through that journey. That's the customer. Well, on the business side of things, we've got a couple of things that are really important to us. How do we execute? How do we deliver? How do we do what we say we're going to do? So from my perspective, when I engage with organizations, I gather research. So I gather data, conduct research, I get information. Once I get that information together, I assess it. This is just my process. I assess it. Then I share some recommendations. I'm running out of space here, but I gather the data, I assess the data, make some recommendations, things that we want to test. Then we test whatever it is that we're going to test, gather more data, assess the data, recommendations, and then at some point we decide we're going to go ahead and implement. So just a basic structure of how do we take the information, do something with the information, change something with the information, make sure that that thing is working, and then start to pour gas onto something. So that's my process relative to engaging with folks. Each of you have your process. This process that you design should be really, 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 really clear, because there shouldn't be any ambiguity around how that changes depending on X, Y, or Z. I mean, this is just how you execute in your business. So very high level of clarity in how you execute on your business. That is linear with a looping option if you've got the looping option. For me, I do. The looping option just means that I'm going to come right back here, but then I'm going to go back through the same steps. So inside our organizations, we have our execution process. So we'll call that business execution. That is going to be something similar to, from a game perspective, let's just say it's got a couple of different steps. From a game perspective, let's say that this is, it's not really going to be like Chutes and Ladders. It's going to be, because you kind of loop around, it's going to be, you know what, I don't know what game I would call that. I need to come up with a new game for that specific piece, but this is the business execution side of things. Now, where I live is in the sales process side of things. So what do we do from a sales stage perspective, specifically for forecasting purposes? So this is like Chutes and Ladders. What we do, and sales process, the reason you need to understand your execution process is because you're going to get consistency here, your delivery, the experience that you want. The reason you need to understand your sales process is specifically for forecasting. I want to be able to forecast accurately what are the things, what are my probabilities of generating revenue inside the business. Because if I can effectively forecast, I now know where I can invest further. I have a level of predictability relative to the way that I'm operating the business. So two different business processes: execute, how do we deliver, and then sales, how do we forecast? For me, these steps, you can use your own. These are the ones that I have on the website and talk about on the podcast and all the other different places. But validation, do I see a scenario where we could conduct business with each other? Qualification, do I understand the story from the perspective of the customer? The story gets into that hexagon view, that account plan, that problem solving piece. Do I actually understand the story from the perspective of the customer? Have I been able to actually identify the problem that exists that they need to solve, the problem that is driving the pain that's happening inside the organization, getting in the way of them getting from their current state to their desired state? So qualification, understand the problem in the context of the way the customer would describe it, okay? Fit, based on my understanding of the problem, can I actually solve for it? Early on in each of our journeys, we try to manufacture fit. We squint. We're like, yeah, you know, that use case is a little bit outside of the scope, but we could do it. Well, then all of a sudden, scope creep comes in, and scope creep sucks. It just gets in the way of building scalable businesses. It may bring in some money, but it could provide the hug of death. So fit, are we actually the right fit for the problem? Can we solve the problem? Feasibility, and I'm changing this, but we'll call this next fit, fit from the customer perspective. Do they believe we're the right fit? Can they afford it? Can they implement it? Because how many times have you taken on the wrong customer and then tried to implement inside your organization, and then realize, oh man, we are spending a lot of time trying to get this thing to where it goes. So now our cost associated with delivery starts to get out of whack, and it delays some other things that we're working on. So fit from our perspective, fit from the customer perspective, feasibility, can they afford it? Can they actually implement it? Proposal, are we actually delivering a proposal? And then let's say closed won, and then the last piece, so closed won, did we win the business? And then the last piece, confirmation. Did we actually do what we said we were going to do? So Validation, do we see a scenario where we work with each other? Qualification, do I understand the problem from the perspective of the customer? A little bit more detail. And there's a lot of different qualification checklists that you can use. You can use the one that I've got. You can use something like a MedPAC. There's a couple of different ones that are out there. Fit, are we the right fit based on our understanding of the problem? Fit from the customer perspective, can they afford it? Are they the right fit? Do they believe they're the right fit based on what we've shared with them and how we put together a solution, put together our proposal, and then move to closed won. Each time you move your way through here, think of like salmon swimming upstream. We have now increased our probability of winning the business. That's all this is about. It is about nothing related to customer decision-making process. It is about nothing related to our business process from an execution. It is solely about probability of sale. There's nothing in here related to timing either. This is all probability of sale, probability of revenue, forecasting. And one of the most common mistakes that people make when it comes to forecasting is they confuse probability of revenue with timing on when that revenue is going to deliver. The only way that we know when the revenue is going to deliver is if we understood the compelling event at the customer side and have aligned what we're delivering with that compelling event. That compelling event could be budget availability based on a fiscal year. It could be, I need to get a solution in place before kids go back to school. It could be, I need to get a solution in place before we go through our quiet period where we can't bring on any additional technology. The question we've got to ask for, the thing that we've got to understand, this is that when piece in here. When does a solution need to be in place? What is the compelling event? That's where you get to the urgency from a customer perspective, not the thing that you're creating, the thing that you're revealing. I'm going to pause just for a second and say, how are we tracking?
Great. I love this last part of pulling out time from this. I mean, it makes sense that if you were going to forecast, you might need time eventually, but really we're looking at a funnel here. We're looking at drop off at each step. I'm interested in Q the most, just by the nature of where my business is. And I think that this almost like qualifying as very often more like, is this person a good, do they fit our ideal customer or not? You know, not do I understand the problem from their perspective. That I kind of call discovery more often. Maybe that's just a difference in words. I'm wondering, perhaps, where do you do that part? Where like, is this person the customer? Do they maybe even have the chance at the business pain? That's my question.
Yeah. So a lot of that's going to happen in discovery, in that initial discovery, right? You're going to be asking a lot of questions. You're going to be gathering information. When you're gathering information in discovery, you're gathering information from non-public or private sources, right? You're engaging with a person, you're gathering information from them. So a lot of that is going to happen in discovery. I do not attribute activity with any of these items. The reason why I don't attribute activity with any of these items, I attribute binary stages. Yes, no. Do we understand the problem in the context of the way the customer would describe it? Yes or no? If we don't understand that problem, we don't deserve to, we can't actually get to fit because we don't understand the problem. So then if we understand the problem and we can solve for it with our current solution, then we're in fit, yes or no. So we can either solve or we can't. Feasibility, they believe. So these are all yes, no binary statements. A problem that a lot of organizations run into when they implement something like a Sandler or some of the other, some sales processes out there is they have a lot of ambiguity in what each of these stages are. So it's really hard for sales reps to determine, am I in this stage or am I not, and put it properly in the system, which starts to throw off your forecast. Timing is really important relative to forecasting because you've got to understand at what time are you going to land the plane on the aircraft carrier, or else you're going to potentially get into a situation where the aircraft carrier is not there, the business isn't there, or the plane runs out of fuel, right? So timing is important. It's just not this isn't the process. This isn't the aspect of the process that's determining timing. This is the aspect of the process that's determining probability. Your timing, your close dates are driven by your compelling event. And then if you've got compelling events done properly, you've got proper close dates in, then you can start to forecast accurately relative to time. But these stages are not what that's not the intention of the stage. And you know, Zach, the way I look at this is kind of like playing chutes and ladders, because what will end up happening, and for those who are not in the US, they call it snakes and ladders, but chutes and ladders, for those that, what ends up happening is I get into a call with a customer, I hear all of the right things. They ask for a proposal. I shoot straight up my ladder and I want to give them a proposal because I think I've got a live one. I've got something real. I skipped a bunch of steps. And then all of a sudden I realize I have to have a conversation with procurement, and there's somebody else in the decision-making process. And now I go all the way back to qualification. And now I need to understand things from their perspective. So game of life, customer decision-making process, chutes and ladders relative to forecasting. I got to figure out what we want this linear thing, which is the business execution piece, to be called from a game perspective. And this is how I've started changing my thinking. Before, I used to not really worry about the business execution piece until I started working with organizations who didn't understand who didn't have clarity around how they execute, how they do what they do. They weren't able to lay out the stepping stones for their customers. So customer, the business, and then the next piece, this last piece, is going to be approach. And in here, we're going to layer on, how do we do the work that we do as reps, as individuals, and where can we think of each of the calls that we have with a customer as a playing card that we're playing in the game. How do we think about discovery? How do we think about capabilities? How do we think about post-trial review? How do we think about these things? And I'll lay through some of that modeling as well. I'm going to ask, am I getting too deep? Am I staying too wide? Am I just like three bears? Am I like too hot, too cold, or just right?
No, this is great. This is really great. I did want to like double click on compelling event, because partially because the name compelling event makes it sound really important, and then also the way you described it makes it sound really important.
Yeah.
It seems like it's a step, maybe the last step or one of the last steps before, buying. And so I just wanted to double click on that and ask for a little more around.
I've heard it called like a trigger, but it also seems a little bit by the examples you give that it's almost like a deadline very often too, though.
Yeah.
Think about, what are some of the most compelling events that you all have had in your lives? Anybody married?
Getting married was going to be
perfect, right?
Yeah.
So there's a date that we're getting married on. That's the compelling event. I have got to be at a weight that gets me into my tux by that compelling event. I have got to get all of the other stuff taken care of by that compelling event. So the cool thing about compelling events is they're going to be different for everybody. I'm a business leader inside my organization. I have a quarterly MBO that I have to deliver on, or an OKR that I have to, objective that I've got to deliver on. That's part of my OKRs that I'm matching, or I've got a bonus tied directly to something. Compelling event. I have to get this thing in place. My CEO delivered something out to the board and said, we are going to do X by whatever time. Compelling event. I have my fiscal year ends on June 30th. Budget is going to be available. It's going to be released. I can't get the solution in place until then. Compelling event. So it's hard for you to figure out what your compelling events are, just like it's hard to figure out all of the customer journey type stuff. But over time, they'll reveal themselves depending on the solution that you're delivering. So if I'm renting out tuxedos, the compelling event I'm looking at is probably based on the wedding date or something to that effect, or the prom or whatever. So that's the compelling event. The compelling event is not yours. You don't create it. It's the customers. They're the one who's buying. They're the ones who is solving the problem.
Is a way to define this like it's an important moment or event that Yeah, that by which the customer needs to solve the problem that the solution or that they need to solve.
I think it's a perfect definition. Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah. I mean, it could be as simple as what, like, let's not complicate it. Thanksgiving, 4th of July barbecue. Getting the invitations out for the 4th of July barbecue and a text message to everybody on the 5th of July is probably not a good thing. You know, like, so we've got the compelling event design backward so that we can execute forward.
So it's almost like, so does it, from the customer journey perspective,
Yeah.
would a compelling event come after solving the problem?
But yeah, because they'll have to solve the problem before the compelling event. So we need to understand what we're doing is we're looking to the future. We know when our taxes are due. We know when or around when a baby is due. We know when or around, like, the baby doesn't, I mean, other than a couple of weird situations, the baby doesn't just pop out, right? Like, you know that some things are happening. So yes, it's something in the future. You're not waiting. I think the piece of clarity here is you're not waiting for the compelling event for the next action to take place. You're identifying the compelling event so that you can design backward and start to provide some kind of a Gantt chart that says, here are all the things that need to happen in order for us to be successful. And then, oh, by the way, we just made it through this piece and we've not made that progress. Now we have risk. And I know that was one of the things we wanted to talk about here is a lot of the design work that we're doing here is so that we have a framework, models that we can look at where when we evaluate our customers or we evaluate our business, we can start to say, here are where some gaps are. This is where our risk is. Given that we understand our gaps and we know what our risk is, now we can determine, do we want to allocate resources to help solve for that? If we don't want to allocate resources to help solve for those because we're okay with the risk, it's okay, it's a business decision. But now we're making business decisions based on data, not based on gut.
Yeah.
Yep. Cool. All right. So none of this matters if people don't do the work. Just, it doesn't, I mean, people or systems can do the work. So let's talk about, so we had the business, we had validation, qualification, fit, feasibility, proposal, closed won, confirmation. Confirmation is really big. A lot of people miss that. That's the, did I do what I said I was going to do? If not, how do I fix it? If yes, who would you recommend I work with to help them fix these things? These processes are, kind of like chutes and ladders. They kind of work their way through the sales process. Now let's talk about the rep approach. So we as business owners, founders, people who are working with us, first thing we need to do is we need to identify. We need to identify our customer, the person that we should be working with, or the group of people that we're working with. So we identify. The next thing we do is we engage. We actually have a conversation with them. We have an email that goes back and forth. We have some kind of experience. We identify, we engage, we establish objectives, clear objectives relative to what that engagement looks like. What happens? What's the thing? What's the thing that should happen as a result of the engagement? Know what our next steps are, desired next steps are, and then call to action so that we can re-engage, establish objectives, get to next steps, call to action. And this is basically monopoly from a consistent approach that each of us should do relative to our engagement with our customers. We identify them, we engage with them, we establish objectives, we clarify next steps, we call them to action, and continue this forward looping process. If people are familiar with things like the OODA loop, which is a John Boyd thing, observe, orient, decide, act. This is that applied to the way that we do our work with a level of consistency so that we can keep things moving forward. If we miss on this with our organizations, deals tend to stall because there's no clarity on next steps. There's ambiguity around what the objective was. Get this right, you will start to see your deals move forward, your engagements move forward. There'll be less kind of why do we meet here? And you can apply this next model I'm going to show you is something you can apply inside your business to have more effective meetings, not only with people inside your organization, but with your customers. And this is call planning. When it comes to call planning, another simple shape, I want to know who is in the room. Who are they? What do they care about? Why do they care about those things? Who's in the room? What are their objectives? Now this I'm anticipating. What are their objectives? What are our objectives? What's my objective? What do I want to accomplish? And what are my desired next steps? So in a discovery call, my who is going to be the prospect. Might be multiple people. There might be one person, but in my discovery call, ideally initial discovery call is one person. Just because the amount of the type of information you're going to be able to get back is going to be, I think is going to be a little bit better, a little bit more transparent. But who's going to be in the room, their objective, what are they looking to accomplish in that meeting? Why did they accept the meeting? In a discovery call, they likely did not accept your meeting because they wanted to see a demo of your product. Yet we jump right in from discovery to demo, and what they wanted, what their objective is, understanding. Can you help me? Right? Can you help? Can you help? Not how can you help? Can you help? Because there's a dance that we're going to continue to go through in all of this. Our objective is to gather information and determine, are we actually talking to the right people? Are we engaged with someone who we can help? Are we doing things that will ultimately turn into a waste of time? So our objective is learning in a discovery call, learn, not present, learn, ask questions, listen. Their objective is to kind of figure things out. Like, can you actually help? If by them sharing information with you, you learn more, and then you can get to the point where you start to ask the right questions to determine, are your next steps logical? Your next steps logical, which means one of my next steps in a discovery call might be a capabilities call, not to deliver the capabilities in the call, but it might be a capabilities call. It might be to get access to more people inside their organization. If I design properly for this discovery call and I know what my next steps are, my desired next steps are, I have an understanding of what my objectives are of the call, I know who's going to be in the room, and I anticipate their objectives, the likelihood of that call being successful increases significantly. If at any point in time, I did not anticipate their objectives or I wasn't clear around my next steps, the shape can't hold water, and now I've got risk. You can model each of your calls, and I know that we're getting close here on time. You can model each of your call planning calls, your effective meeting calls, for the stages that you expect your customer to go through to help enable them to make better decisions or power up through that decision-making process. So if we were to look at the customer journey, we might have a discovery call here. We might have a capabilities call here. We might have a post-trial review call here if they go and review on their own, or we might have to have a formalized trial kickoff here. We may have a contract negotiation discussion here. These are all different cards that we're playing. They aren't our sales process. They aren't the customer decision-making process. They're engagements that we're having with our customers as we build out our engine to help accelerate speed to impact, accelerate decision-making, keep things moving forward. Common call plans or common effective meetings would be things like a discovery call. What does a discovery call look like? So in each of these, I still want to know who's going to be in there, what are their objectives, what are our objectives, what are our desired next steps. In a capabilities call, who's going to be in there, what are their objectives, what are our objectives, what are our desired next steps. In a pre-trial review, who's going to be in the call, their objectives, desired next steps. We can design for each of these. And when we start to identify stalls in the customer decision-making process or in our sales process, then we can say, hey, maybe I need to have a call to enable my customer and start powering up. And all of these things put together, customer, business, approach, start to build out the components of your sales engine. the revenue engine. The challenge that we run into as business leaders inside organizations is we try to do too much. We overcomplicate all of this. We wait for it to be perfect. As simple as possible, as few steps as possible, as complex as necessary to get to the results. Just make sure you're tracking data. That was a lot to cover in 50 some odd minutes. I hope it was useful.
Yeah, absolutely.
I thought it was awesome.
Cool.
Yeah.
Super helpful. I think I love the clarity of the customer journey map, the obstacles, designing instances to help them overcome those obstacles. Super helpful.
Cool.
Yeah. Zach, Chris, we have a couple other folks on the call. Does anyone else have questions? We have 2 minutes, so we can do a lightning question if anybody has one. All right, no light. Okay.
What are
I'll
lighting
ask a,
question?
I'll ask a question
Oh, okay,
just to be
cool.
engaging. How
Yeah,
are y'all?
What's up, Chris?
Great,
Hey,
Chris.
hey, Mike. So on that sales journey, I was just having absolute flashbacks of things that I don't want to go back and revisit from like a account executive side of things. But when you're talking about forecasting, and I thought it was interesting, you said time wasn't involved. But I get what you're saying when you're going through a cycle and you're trying to get through stages, and these stages eventually can give you some predictability on whether you're going to get the revenue. What, man, it's got to be like, what is the, I mean, how much data goes in before that, any of those stages and those probabilities are even worthwhile thinking about? Especially kind of taking this from I liked some of where I thought we were starting, which is you're very early in revenue. You don't have complex, customer acquisition or sales cycles. You're trying to get some first people on board to keep the engine going. How much data's got to go through there, do you think, before you're like, all right, well, now we can kind of reliably use it for forecasting?
Yeah, I don't think a lot of data really needs to go in there. Like it's, and the reason why I don't think a lot of data really needs to go into it is each data point is going to be directionally relevant. So you get your first data point, first person that's going through this, and you start to say, okay, I use 5% for validation, 25% for qualification, 50% for fit, 60% for fit on the customer side, 90% for proposal because of all the work that's been done, and 100% for closed won. Those are my numbers. Now, I've worked with organizations where we've changed those numbers based on the data telling us that it's a little bit different. This same process applies to retention and expansion deals. So we've got our retention on a qualified customer is going to be much higher. So qualification, we started at 80% there. I don't think you need a lot of data. What you need to do is continue to evaluate this data on time and adjust when it makes sense. I would not adjust those probabilities even in really, really fast sales cycles, I wouldn't adjust those probabilities more often than about 90 days. Sometimes you won't adjust them for a year. Sometimes you won't adjust them for 2 years because you just don't have enough data. It's the distinction between time and the percentage is time is customer driven. It's not when do I as a rep think this is going to happen. Early it might, but when you get later on in this, as you move through this, your closed won date should be driven by something that you know about the customer, not something that you think you know about. Hey, my average sales cycles is 90 days. In the absence of a compelling event, the thing that I tend to use is fiscal year. I just use fiscal year because a lot of times, depending on the product or solution that we're selling, it may not have been budgeted for properly in the current fiscal year. So there needs to be that event where the money becomes available. And Walt Disney Company is an organization I work with. Their fiscal year ends in September. If I wasn't talking to them about a solution in April, there was no way we were going to get that done in the next fiscal year because the numbers were going to be too high. And if I didn't make their first budget round, now I'm looking to kick somebody else out, and depending on where things are prioritized. And this is where sales gets really complex. It's extremely nuanced as you start peeling back layers. I would just reinforce where we started, which is as simple as possible, as complex as necessary, as few steps as possible. Add in the extra steps when you need them, but build, scaffold, build, layer on like an additive manufacturing thing as you need to, and as you go through. But Chris, I don't think that there's not a certain amount of data. The first data point is going to help you. I know we're losing some people. We're over, and I have got to run to a call.
Cool, guys, this was awesome, Mike. We'll get the recording out, and awesome. We really appreciate you doing this.
Awesome. Hey, great to be on here, and look forward to the next one. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Have a good one.